So investigating relations among people, things, subjects, and objects can sound both deceptively simple and impossibly broad. Perhaps not surprisingly, as my book's title suggests, in Renaissance England, gender profoundly marked a person's manner of relating to the things making up her or his world. And perhaps in less immediately obvious ways, sexuality, too, was central to the intertwined lives of people and things. And that's why those words are in the title, because gender and sexuality were very, very much bound up in how people related to the material world. For women poets, life stage and marital status are especially important to consider, since the common law correlated a woman's relation to property with her status as single, married, or widowed. After all, there was a 17th century legal treatise, which was called The Laws, Resolutions of Women's Rights from 1632. And this legal treatise is broken down into different sections. And I'm going to tell you the titles of two of these sections just so you get a sense of what this meant for women, how the common law related to them as married women. One of the section titles is the following: That which the wife hath is the husband's. This is paired with the following section title: That which the husband hath is his own. So let's check that parallelism out again. So that which the wife hath is the husband's. That which the husband hath is his own. Okay, so just we're clear on that. The common law theory of coverture promoted, even if it failed to ensure, a marital scenario of his and more of his, rather than his and hers. Women were not unaware of their frequent portrayal in contemporary male-authored verse as sexualized objects, and some women poets portray their female speakers as asserting control over and agency specifically via material love tokens in a manner that deflects away from both poet and speaker the tendency of men's verse to render women passive sexualized objects. Meanwhile, for male poets, meditations upon real estate frequently conflate women with land, while also summoning anxieties about female chastity. For men and women alike, poetic scenarios of same-sex love or friendship inflect depictions of material gift exchange more positively than do heteroerotic ones. So I've sort of explained now why gender and sexuality are foregrounded in the title, but of course rank, wealth, education, social prestige and connections, religion, race, and other factors also affected how people and things interacted and how poets portray those interactions. So in the book, gender and sexuality have to do with the relations between people and things in every single poem. But these other factors come up periodically at different moments in different poems. And so I try to attend to as many of these factors as possible to the degree to which they bear upon the specific poems. So obviously, these issues are pretty complicated. But to add to this already considerable complexity, a person, male or female, might control, use, possess, own, or have particular rights in a given material object. One might share with multiple others control, use, possession, ownership, or rights in a thing. Furthermore, the status of a given thing is not necessarily straightforward, static, or stable. The same item, a gold ring, for instance, at different times and changing contexts, might be a gift or a commodity. The relation between subject and object can also vary significantly. The binary distinguishing person from thing, for example, is by no means fixed, even though a lot of times today people act as if that binary is fixed. But as Igor Kopytov explains, I'm going to read you a long quotation now, so this is all Kopytov's words. In contemporary Western thought, we take it more or less for granted that things, physical objects, and rights to them represent the natural universe of commodities. At the opposite pole, we place people, who represent the natural universe of individuation and singularization. This conceptual polarity of individualized persons and commoditized things is recent, and culturally speaking, exceptional. People can be and have been commoditized again and again in innumerable societies throughout history by way of those widespread institutions known under the blanket term slavery. So that's what Kopytov has to say about why this binary is not fixed between people and things. During the Renaissance, European colonial activities, including the practice of slavery, would have made the conflation of person and thing a conceptual commonplace. Similarly, as Patrick Geary points out, and this is a quotation from Geary, like slaves, relics, meaning religious relics. So like slaves, religious relics belong to that category of objects that are both persons and things. Geary also indicates that, quote, sacred images and other extremely important prestige objects, such as royal and imperial regalia, art, and entailed estates, like that one, can, under the right circumstances, closely resemble persons because, quote, the boundaries between object and subject are culturally induced and semi-permeable. So that's the end of Gary's quote. Women, in particular, can easily fall into the class of objects. They can find themselves in a commodity situation, which Arjun Appadurai defines as, quote, the situation in which a thing's exchangeability, past, present, or future, for some other thing is its socially relevant feature. He continues, quote, marriage transactions might continue the context in which women are valued most intensely and most appropriately regarded as exchange values, unquote. As I discuss in the book, although women were not technically categorized by law as property in Renaissance England, they were often represented and treated as if they were. For example, to some people, to some audience members or to some readers, it just seems so very convincing in Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew when Petruchio notoriously claims ownership of his new bride, Catherine. He says, I will be master of what is mine own. She is my goods, my chattels. She is my house, my household stuff, my field, my barn, my horse, my ox, my ass, my anything, unquote. However, by examining women's own writing, instead of relying solely upon male-authored representations of them, my book reveals fascinating ways in which women imagine themselves as subjects mastering objects, exactly the opposite of how Petruchio is talking about Catherine here. A 17th century woman who went by the pen name Eliza makes an interesting counterpoint to Shakespeare's portrait of Petruchio as an especially domineering, possessive husband. Eliza, a wife living under the legal constraints of coverture, which was that business of that which the wife hath is the husband's, right? So she was living under that condition. Confidently tells her husband how to behave in the event of her death in this poem. And by the way, the image you're looking at here is a photocopy from a 17th century printed text. So what I showed you before were handwritten manuscript text. This is a 17th century printed text. So this is what she has to say, Eliza, a wife living under coverture, to her husband when she imagines her own death. She says the following: when from the world I shall be ta'en, and from earth's necessary pain, then let no blacks be worn for me, not in a ring, my dear, by thee, but in this bright diamond let it be worn in remembrance of me. And when it sparkles in your eye, think 'tis my shadow passeth by. For why, more bright you shall me see than that or any gem can be. Even in these first few lines, one can see that Eliza's speaker strongly asserts her agency by telling her husband what to do. She also assumes a possessive stance toward the diamond to which the poem refers. It's hers, and she'll give it when and to whomever she chooses. And if her husband mistakenly conflates her with the gem, the poem corrects that objectifying view by emphasizing how different she is from it. So in this poem, she's actually portraying an object that allows her to resist becoming an object herself. But by contrasting men's and women's verse, my book also exposes unexpected limits to some men's abilities to see themselves as controlling subjects. So it's not the case that every character or male poet comes across like Petruchio in Taming of the Shrew. So there are limits, and some of them are unexpected, to men's abilities to see themselves as a kind of controlling subject. My book also calls attention to the objectification of men in poetry and reminds us that men and women alike could be depicted as both subject and object in the very same poem. I'm going to show you one last set of pictures and then finish up very quickly. These are some of the love tokens in question. This is a Renaissance wedding ring, and part of what is interesting about it, and the other one that I'll show next, is that inside these wedding rings there are poetic inscriptions. So these were called posies at the time, but they actually have a little rhyming couplet inside each one that was meant to be a comment on the marriage, and that's one of the ways in which lyric poetry is very associated with love tokens. It's kind of actually hard to separate them out, especially since poems themselves could be love tokens, or a poem could accompany something like a ring like that. So that there's a very slippery relationship there between poetry and lyric poetry and love tokens. So then if we flip on through to the next rings, this is a memorial ring, and I've got this one and one other to show you, and this is directly relevant to what I just read you from Eliza's poetry, because when she says that she wants her husband to wear a diamond, she says that she actually, to remind you, she says, let no blacks be worn for me, not in a ring, my dear, by thee, but in this bright diamond, let it be worn in remembrance of me. So she is referring to this kind of ring. In the middle of the 17th century in England, this kind of memorial ring became sort of a fashionable thing to wear in memory of deceased loved ones. And this particular ring is gold and it has black enamel on it. In the bottom part, the bottom half of it, you can actually see two folded skeletal legs. The top are two crossed implements, and they're gravedigger's tools. So you have a pickaxe and a shovel that are crossed together kind of as an analog to the skeleton crossed underneath. So this is the kind of ring she's telling your husband, don't wear that.